Hey guys, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to do a genre spotlight on post-punk, which is a genre that I've grown to love over the past couple of weeks. Punk rock in the 70s dominated the music sphere with artists like The Clash, Sex Pistols, Television, and Patti Smith at the forefront of the genre. It was characterized for the most part by distorted and hyper guitar riffs and aggressive vocal performances with confronting and political lyricism. While this was an almost international phenomena, in the late 70s, artists would depart from the simplicity of punk rock, fusing genres such as funk, electronic, and jazz music. Artists were determined to escape from the traditional form of punk rock, which almost makes it more punk. And the label that was given to it was post-punk, and it would often blend into multiple genres such as new wave, no wave, gothic rock, and even shoegaze. And without further ado, I'm going to give you my top five post-punk albums, only one per artist. Number five, we have Glenn Branca's The Ascension. While the punk influences may seem less obvious on this record, it's certainly still there, with tracks like The Spectacular Commodity after a long anxious build-up using those catchy and distorted guitar riffs that make it irresistible to nod your head to. An absolute barrage of pure energy for the whole course of the album. Lesson number two is an absolute cacophony of organized chaos filled with brilliant displays of distorted guitars and clashing drum work that makes it such an anxiety-inducing listen. And this is what this whole album is like, a whole anxiety attack. If you want a film comparison, then it's like Good Time or Uncut Gems. The track structure is short but sweet with an incredibly infectious riff and booming drums, and it makes for a really powerful experience. Not only is this album so anxious and filled with paranoia, but there are some genuinely stunning songs on this, like the track Lightfield in Consonance, where the guitar work is glistening and absolute shines on the track. The drums take a step back on this track to let the guitars take the spotlight, and it works beautifully. And at the end, the progression is like Godspeed You Black Emperor-esque. And the crazy thing is that this was made in the 80s, way before Godspeed You came out. And not to mention the final track, which feels incredibly claustrophobic because of the cacophony of instruments being played. And along with this feeling of claustrophobia, there's also a sense of dread within the track. Not only is this one of the best post-punk albums ever, it's incredibly ahead of its time. Number four, we have Talking Heads with Remain in Light. Talking Heads Remain in Light is one of the most iconic albums to come out of the not only post-punk movement, but the 80s in general. This album is one of the many examples of post-punk crossing into other genres, this one being new wave. The instrumentals are funky and fantastic as expected from the legendary Brian Eno, and the vocals are quite unique, mostly being shaky and sort of its own entity apart from the music. But even with all these fun elements, the lyrics are pretty conscious about the society we live in. With Houses in Motion, the production is as funky as other tracks, with beautiful horn playing from John Hassell. But the lyrics are about the dread of capitalism. And Listening Wind is about someone carrying out a terrorist attack on America, describing their point of view and the reasons as to why he's doing it. In the first verse, describing what Americans had done to their village and remembering their lives before the American invasion. Even David Byrne said about this song that, I understand why America is not universally loved. That's been obvious for years and years, but it's not obvious to a lot of Americans. I mean, I thought this album was just a really fun album before I looked at the lyrics, but it's really dark stuff. And this really shows that no matter how far you stray away from punk, the socially conscious lyricism is always there within post-punk. At number three, we have Swans with Children of God. Ah, Swans, old reliable. Despite all of the incredibly boundary-pushing music this group has put out over the years, this post-punk record is the first to capture the sound that Swans would go ahead with throughout their career. With Jira's aggressive vocals and the heavy drum work, this was the sound that would stay consistent for most of the Swans' career span. Songs like New Mind and Sex God Sex exemplify this with the sparse and booming drums over Jira's deep vocals. It makes for a terrifying experience. Also, Jira's cryptic and minimalist lyricism not only perfectly matches the mysterious nature of the band in general, but also the ominous production. I especially love the guitar work on this record, with Like a Drug being a huge reason why. Even though it's a simple riff, its sharpness makes the song so much more powerful than it already is. Beautiful Child is a very unsettling listen, with Michael Gira talking about sacrificing a child with reference to Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. Not only is the lyrical content disturbing on this album, but the instrumentation is frantic and anxiety-inducing. This album is incredibly haunting and terrifying, with its strengths being able to unsettle any listener with a combination of the paranoid production, Jira's aggressive vocals, and the lyrical content. At number 2, we have Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures. I think that Joy Division is the prototype for me when we're talking about post-punk. While they're not the first to do post-punk, their gothic sound is the sound that I immediately associate with the genre. And I think Unknown Pleasures is absolutely one of the absolute peaks of post-punk. It has everything you want in an album: dark and melancholic lyricism, distant and deep vocals, and heavy and atmospheric production. Or at least what I want in an album. This album is also a lot more punk than most post-punk albums on this list. The distorted guitar riffs are there, with it being very distant and creating a cold and depressive atmosphere, which is perfect for Ian Curtis's deep vocals. And also, Ian Curtis has grown to become one of my favourite songwriters ever, with his songwriting shining on this album, especially and bittersweetly on songs like Insight and the incredible New Dawn Fades, which are extremely depressive. New Dawn Fades, however, is the absolute reason as to why this album is so highly regarded. Curtis talks about how he feels that his relationship with his partner is beginning to fade, and reading about how he died, it's really bittersweet. The song is genuinely one of the greatest songs of all time, in my opinion, and where Joy Division truly hit their peak. Another song I think is brilliant on this album is She's Lost Control Again, where Curtis writes about a woman who's suffering from an epileptic fit, which he also suffers from, and his desperate and fearful delivery gives for a dramatic feel to the track. In conclusion, while this album is very highly praised throughout the music community, it is truly one of the peaks of post-punk and an absolute achievement in music in general. With number 1, we have a Nice Life with Death Consciousness. This is quite possibly the most depressive album of all time. This album contains some of the darkest and depressing sides of post-punk and elevates them to another level. For example, Bloodhail's bass line seems almost guttural and dark, and that along with the shoegaze-esque guitar work makes for an almost fulfilling and depressive musical experience. Guitars are often distorted and lo-fi to create the effect of sincerity, and it works every time. And like on The Big Loom, where the guitar gives off an almost drone effect with Dan singing about contemplating suicide, and I don't even know how to describe it. The lo-fi effect comes back on Telephonia with Dan Barrett's distant vocals giving off a cold and desolate atmosphere, talking about wanting to go back in time to contact a deceased loved one. Waiting for black metal records to come in the mail probably sticks to the post-punk genre the most from the track list, with the fast and distorted guitar riffs and Joy Division-esque drumming. This track takes the focus off of the vocals for the most part and emphasizes the incredibly high energy production, and this is then followed up by the epic holy fucking shit 40,000, where the slow build-up culminates into an incredibly powerful drop with distorted guitar and drums. In fact, the second half of this album is filled to the brim with near-perfect songs, including the incredibly nihilistic and frantic Deep Deep and I Don't Love, which is possibly the most depressing on the record, which is saying something. And I don't think I could talk about this album without talking about one of the greatest closers to an album ever with Earthmover. This track is about the existential crisis of living as a golem, whose only purpose is to destroy. And this track is incredibly heavy with the distorted guitars showing up again, and the booming percussion making for one of the most impactful musical experiences you'll ever have. And that final drop is absolutely earth-shattering. This is an album that can not only compel you with lyrics, but also with its dark and depressive production. And that is why this album is the peak of post-punk. And that's it. Pretty short video for you guys. I really enjoyed doing this type of video where I could just talk about albums from specific genres for probably like a minute. And yeah, I've been really enjoying doing this again. I'm hoping to do this again. Comment what genre I should do next, or just tweet at me, whatever. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow all the socials in the description, and see ya.